Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Winning. Winning. You remember when Donald Trump said you get tired of winning? The 4 years that he was in office, that kind of winning, not so much. But I'll tell you, Joe Biden killing it this week. The Holy Mansion, holy moly, Joe Manchin. I'm waiting for him to Lucy this again, but looks like there may be a deal on the climate issue, maybe something on the tax issue, maybe. Manchin has said that he will support what is being called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. What they are saying is that this is going to help bring in some additional revenues. They're going to do that by raising the minimum corporate tax 15%, which means, sorry, you don't get to pay zero. They say that's going to bring in about $313 billion. They're doing some prescription drug pricing reform, which they think is going to raise about $288 billion. They're going to add some money into the IRS to make them go after rich people, get them to pay their taxes. I think that's a good thing. They claim that's going to bring in about $124 billion, and the carried interest loophole that they're going to do something with. They're saying about $14 billion. They're going to invest in energy security, some climate change stuff. They're going to invest somewhere around $369 billion there and extend the Affordable Care Act so that people can continue to get affordable health insurance. That's going to cost about $64 billion. They're saying it's going to reduce our deficit. And I know Manchin's fixated on reducing the deficit, but they're saying about $300 billion in deficit reduction. I don't know in this moment that that's the most important thing, but it's one of those must-haves. If it gets to get something done on the climate front, we start moving in that direction. If we start taxing our billionaires and corporate America, I think it's a step in the right direction. And look, this is one of these moments, because we talked about this yesterday with the CHIPS Act that passed. I'm for years not in favor of handing money over to corporate America. Again, the CHIPS Act going to invest billions of dollars in reshoring manufacturing, which I got to tell you, I think is extremely important, something that we absolutely have to do. They're going to invest about $280 billion in shoring up our American manufacturing, bringing back our ability to make stuff again. And if the pandemic taught us anything, we need to make stuff. And we need to be, if we're going to continue to have that entrepreneurial edge, that creative edge, got to make stuff. Kind of important. And as much as I'm against the idea of handing corporate America money, it's got to come with strings attached. And I'm hoping, devil in details. I'm looking forward to seeing that. But we got to do this. Now, I find it interesting that this happens the day after the CHIPS bill passes, because, and this is the part where we've been beating up on Joe Manchin for quite some time, and to be honest, it deserved a little bit of it. But this could be one of those things where Joe Biden, being a wily veteran, Joe Biden being someone who has been around the Senate a day or two, understands how to maneuver, understands how the game is played, and was never hyperbolic and never really going after Manchin and Sinema, I think may have played this the right way. May have held the cards close to the vest, played the ace when he needed to, because if you remember, Mitch McConnell was going to tank the CHIPS bill if there's any talk of climate legislation, any talk of tax legislation, any talk of any of the other agenda were to move. McConnell's bargaining chip was tank the CHIPS bill, because he knew manufacturing was something near and dear to Biden's heart, something the country desperately needs, a win that the Democrats really wanted and need. So, naturally, McConnell holding the Democrats hostage. It's interesting that the very next day from the passage of that CHIPS Act, that this then goes and, yep, this is what we're doing. Seems interesting. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what happened. I'm saying this seems quite plausible and seems like something that, I got to tell you, seems like something I think Biden would pull off. As I've said, I think highly of Joe Biden. I think he's somebody who knows how to play the game as well as anyone. This a big part of it. So a good week, Now, what's interesting? You got the big win on the chips bill. We're gonna start making those important little things that make our smartphones smart, that make our smart bombs smart, that make our cars smart. Because evidently we're too stupid. But, the things we need to make stuff, we're going to start doing that, and that's good. We're going to start addressing the climate, maybe start taxing some folks. So it was not surprising to me that Senate Republicans just blocked the PACT Act. Say that 10 times fast. The PACT Act. Something that had Republican support just weeks ago, now has been blocked. Is this a tit for tat? Is this a, now we're angry kind of moment? Now, this is a critical piece of legislation for our veterans because this is a veterans health care bill. It's something, again, as I said, Republicans supported. It's one of those things that should pass the U.S. Senate 100-0. It's that kind of legislation. And I say this all the time. If you're going to put people in harm's way, if you're going to call on our nation's youth to go and be the heroes that we prop them up to be, you got to treat them like that when they return. When they return with all of the illnesses and all of the broken, you name it, the substance abuse, the broken bodies, the broken minds, all of that. You've got to deal with that, and you've got to make them as close to whole as possible. And when you burn stuff and they get toxic diseases and cancers, you got to deal with that too. And that's what this vote was. It was to advance what was called the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, honoring our promise to address comprehensive Toxics Act, the PACT Act. Didn't pass today. And as I said, it seems like a tit for tat thing. Now, this legislation was named after Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, who died in 2020 from toxic exposure because of his military service. And again, I go back to, this seems like a no-brainer. This seems like something that should have just gone through, should not even have been an issue. But this is what happens, and this is what just seems to happen far too often, where issues that shouldn't be issues for what seem to be no reason pop up. And I always ask the question, if this is how we treat this generation of heroes, who's going to be the next generation? Very scary stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Love to hear your thoughts. Now, look, as I've been saying, this administration, and I've said this a bunch of times, so there's no one who's going to be surprised by it. Biden was not my first choice. I was a Bernie Sanders guy from the start. I was a Bernie Sanders guy back in 2016 as well. But Joe Biden's got some stuff done. I mean, you go back to the American Rescue and Recovery Act. You go back to that. We got that historic infrastructure bill passed through. You got the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act passed through. You got the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, gun reform that hasn't, the last, 4 presidents couldn't get anything done on. You've got, just same day as that, you had the Keep Kids Fed Act. I think this is the one that gets me the most, because If you remember during the Obama years, Republicans were losing their minds over the idea that Michelle Obama would say, no, we need to feed children at school. The fact that some of them, a couple of them, would vote for this, pretty remarkable. Joe Biden did that. They're going to help pay some of the reimbursement costs for school meals and provide meals at child care centers. It's a pretty big deal, I think. It's something that was taken away during the Reagan years. Pretty big deal. And then you've got the CHIPS Act, really important. And now you moved legislation on climate and taxes. And look, there's a ton more. I was going through the website at the White House, whitehouse.gov on legislation, and there's literally 10 pages of stuff. As I was going through, I'm going, wow, I didn't realize that. Because our media doesn't spend a lot of time on that. Because he's actually getting stuff done. Actually signing things into law. But there's too many people going, Joe Biden, he's senile. For a guy who's senile and Sleepy Joe and a guy who doesn't do much, he's sure done a lot. I give him credit for that. And ushering through in a 50-50 Senate. Remember, 50-50 Senate. I think it's a big deal. I think this is a good week for Joe, and I think, look, good timing. Winning on legislation, going to start seeing inflation coming down, going to start seeing gas prices have been coming down for the last month and a half. You don't hear the right whining about that. In fact, when it's coming down, it's coming down too fast. Yeah, I'm waiting for the next outrage, the next distraction. Oh, that's right. It was Kamala Harris today saying to a group of blind people that she was wearing blue and that she's a woman and that she was sitting at a table. Yeah, that was the outrage today. Crazy, crazy stuff. Love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I had an interesting conversation with a Trump supporter. And it was one of those, had the hat and everything. Bought the t-shirt. Full-fledged Trumpy. But willing to listen, willing to at least engage in a discussion. And the topic of recession, Joe Biden's, of course, the Joe Biden's done all this, and crime is rampant, and the recession's all his fault, and the interest rate hikes, and of course the Federal Reserve has announced a 0.75% point increase in the interest rates, and to him that's just the end of the world, and he doesn't know why, but it's the end of the world for him. And it was one of these moments where, I started, explaining and talking about, this idea that we've been pitted against each other on really, really dangerous grounds. And I pointed to this story about the money in our politics. And there's a story right now that over at Reuters about the drug maker Merck, who has avoided billions of dollars of taxes by, by how this worked is they evidently they made their top selling cancer drug in the Netherlands, and their corporate office, I guess, they ran all of their business through Ireland. No, the patents were in the Netherlands. This is what it was. The patents were in the Netherlands, and it was manufactured in Ireland, but sold here. So they just basically ran all the profits out of the country, but profited mightily, and got away with it. And it's one of these things where you go, corporate America is just robbing us blind at every turn, and feeding us this narrative of it's the other, it's your neighbor, it's that Democrat, it's that liberal, it's that conservative, it's the other, it's look to your right, look to your left, it's them. It's not the person up in the boardroom. Same thing with gas prices. Oh no, it's Joe Biden who did this. Instead of the reality that it's ExxonMobil and Shell and Chevron and all of them who are seeing record profits, taking advantage of an opportunity. This is an opportunity. It is what it is. It's monopoly. It's mass consolidation. There's no competition in that marketplace. And we began having this conversation about taxes and well, the government just wants to steal all our money. And I go, the reality is, the Tea Party did an amazing thing for a portion of this country. And it got them to think that they're taxed enough already, that they're the most taxed generation in the history of civilization. Nobody's been more taxed than we are. And I would argue, as a working class, we are sufficiently taxed. So when I said, look, when you're talking about taxation, who are we talking about? When you're talking about taxed enough already, who are you talking about? And he's like, well, me and you and us. I go, okay, as long as we understand on who we're talking about. Corporate America has walked away from paying their taxes. I look at Merck. They've gotten away with avoiding billions of dollars in paying taxes because they've figured out how to lobby for massive loopholes. They've got avoidance lawyers who figure out how to use those loopholes. They've figured it out. And I went on to explain to him, I said, look, in 1952, when we had a good socialist president like Republican Dwight David Eisenhower, the top marginal tax rate in this country was 92%. And he's like, no, it wasn't. I go, yeah, it was. And everybody paid a bit of taxes. And every $2,000, that tax rate went up incrementally until you got to 92%. So the more money you made, the higher your tax rate went up. The bigger your shoulders, the more water you carried back to the cave, however you want to frame that. Today, that number is 37%. How did we go from a top marginal rate of 92% all the way down to 37%? Right now, it's 37% on people making over $638,000. The corporate tax rate in 1952, from 1952 to 63, for the first $25,000 was 30%. Anything over 25 grand was 52%. We had a graduated tax system where small businesses paid less, big businesses paid more, because we understood there's a difference. We want to encourage small business ownership. We want to encourage people to hang out their shingle. We want to give them a chance to compete with the big boy by paying a lower tax rate, because we want that. We want innovation. We want all that stuff. That's been destroyed. Every president has had a graduated tax code for small businesses. Now, you could argue that because of big businesses, wealth and their ability to hire tax avoidance lawyers and all this stuff, that business, it's all screwed up anyway. But one of the things Trump did in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, did away with the graduated tax system, and we've got a flat tax, 21% corporate flat tax, and didn't do away with the loopholes. So there's no end. So you could still keep paying zero, but you're going to pay less, even if you decided to pay them. A 21% corporate tax rate. So I asked him, I said, look, how did we go from the wealthy in this country, the wildly wealthy, the enormously wealthy, the captains of industry, our billionaire class, our extremely wealthy people, going from a 92% tax rate in 1952 down to 37%? How did that happen? How did corporate America go from a tax rate of 52% down to 21%? or actually down to effectively zero. Because even when it was 35%, the effective rate was still about 14%. How did that happen? And the reality is what happened is they bought our politics. They bought our representatives. They bought our system. To where, and this is where we agreed, the policies that we want to see enacted, like an increase in the minimum wage, stronger unionization laws, better health care access, stronger infrastructure, better education. This is stuff that even someone who bought the Trump hat agrees with. We can't get it passed. Why? Because the moneyed interests won't allow it. Because that means that they would have to pay for it. Because one of the questions I asked him, I said, when you bought the hat, it says, "Make America Great." When do you think America was great? He goes, well, 1950s. And I said, well, this is why it was great. With all of that revenue that came in. Now, understand, nobody paid 92%. There were loopholes, tons of them. But the effective rate was in the high 60s. They were paying a good amount of what they were making. And there weren't all of these, hey, we can figure out how to scheme the system and pay zero. That didn't happen. What did they do with the revenue that they brought in? They funded education. We had education system, the envy of the world. We funded infrastructure. We had an infrastructure envy of the world. We funded higher education, where you could go as far as your talents could take you. As I've said a number of times, I have a friend who went all the way through the University of Michigan, undergraduate all the way through law school, working a crummy minimum wage job, driving a jalopy car, living in a crummy apartment, came out debt-free. You can't do that today. Not even close. You can't get a minimum wage job and get a crappy car and live in a crummy apartment and not go to the University of Michigan, let alone buy something from a vending machine on that campus. And why is that? Well, it's because we've seen a massive redistribution of wealth upward. And this is where the education process and all of this has to come back to. For me, it comes back to the tax code. Get away from all of the stuff that's meant to tear us apart and divide us and keep us pitted against each other. It's about the money. Follow the money. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about dollars and cents. It's not about black and white. It's not about brown. It's about green. It's what I've always believed. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. I was one of the only white kids in the entire neighborhood. I was the minority in a minority-dominated neighborhood. And what I knew as a very young kid, the only color that mattered was green, because we were all broke. At the end of the day, our cupboards were all bare. We were all eating cereal out of a Cool Whip bowl stained with spaghetti sauce in it. That's the reality. And until we wake up and start going, we do need to get the money out of our politics. We do need to have a tax code that is more progressive and more graduated, to where the bigger your shoulders, the more you pay. Until we start doing those things, nothing else is going to matter. We're going to keep fighting each other over nonsense. We're going to keep fighting each other over pronouns. How stupid is that? Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any portion of the program, you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Always there, always available. Love to hear your thoughts. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Reed Galen from the Lincoln Project going to be here to share some thoughts on maybe how Democrats hold on to the House, maybe hold on to the Senate, maybe something back after this. Stick around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day miners' president Ginger Goodwin was shot dead in British Columbia. His murder sparked Canada's first general strike in Vancouver the following week. Goodwin had arrived in British Columbia 8 years earlier and found work in the Cumberland mines on Vancouver Island. He considered working conditions in the mines absolutely appalling and began advocating for safety and organizing miners. He was soon blacklisted after participating in a 2-year coal miners' strike for recognition on the island.
He moved to Trail, British Columbia, where he emerged as a Socialist Party candidate in the 1916 election. He was also elected president of the International Union of Mine, Mill and Smelter Workers District 6, the vice president of British Columbia's Federation of Labor, and the head of the local Trades and Labor Council. He openly expressed his opposition to Canada's entry into the war, stating that workers were now employed in killing each other. He was found unfit for military duty after a medical exam. That was until he led a strike for the 8-hour day at Consolidated Mining and Smelting. It was the world's largest lead and zinc smelter and a key munitions producer during the war. His status was quickly changed to make him eligible for conscription. He fled to the Cumberland Hills, where he hid out for months to avoid the draft. And on this day, Goodwin was shot dead by a Dominion Police special constable. He was brought back to Cumberland, where thousands turned out for his funeral in a mile-long procession. The Vancouver labor movement was outraged by Goodwin's murder and called a one-day general strike on August 2nd to protest his killing. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Republican politicos are all over Joe Biden for failing to stop inflation. Perhaps you wonder, though, what these squawkers would do if they were in charge. No need to wonder. Just look back to 1974. When Americans were being pummeled by price spikes that topped 12%, nearly double what we're enduring today. But by gollies, President Gerald Ford and his Republican contingent in Congress met the challenge head-on with a new magical program of economic uplift they called WIN, Whip Inflation Now. But it was nothing, just a political slogan with no magic and no action behind it. Price controls, antitrust action? No. GOP Inc. didn't want to offend, much less punish, corporate titans for a little profiteering, so they shifted the blame for inflation to consumers, demanding that families just say no to price gouging. Ford himself went on national TV, urging fellow citizens to join him in buying, quote, only those products and services priced at or below present levels. The core of the Republican program, then, was telling hard-hit wage earners to battle the monopolistic behemoths of big oil, big pharma, big food et al. On their own by simply refusing to pay inflated prices for the gasoline, medicines, groceries, and such that, hello, they had to have. As a reward, everyone who signed a form promising to be an inflation fighter was sent a nifty win button indicating their patriotic participation. Sure enough, Americans responded enthusiastically with an avalanche of ridicule. Even Ford's top economic advisor was whopper-jawed by the GOP's idea that the substance of their policy was a political button. It was surreal. I said to myself, this is unbelievable stupidity.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the folks over at the 538 blog, they've come out and said that, hey, there might be a chance for Democrats come November. Now, the narrative is, bloodbath. The narrative is, it's the midterms, sitting president, his party always takes a beating. But this is the first time that it shows Democrats with a chance to hold on to the Senate. I actually think there's a chance that they could increase their 50-50 margin. I'm hoping here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, you see, John Fetterman come out ahead of Dr. Quack, which again, someone who has no business whatsoever running for Senate, let alone Senate here in my state of Pennsylvania. But look, if Herschel Walker is still within striking distance in Georgia, anything is possible. And here to share some thoughts on, this November and maybe how Democrats don't get slaughtered, I've asked Reed Galen to come talk with us. Reed is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Reed, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thanks for having me back, Rick.
So I'm looking at this and I'm going, this is a good sign. 538 is now, saying, hey, there's a chance. 51% doesn't make me all warm and fuzzy, but it's still better than it was.
Well, look, all you got to win by is, 50% plus one. So let's take what we can get. I think it is good news. I think it's moving in the right direction. And as I think, the fallout from the Dobbs decision on abortion is starting to take hold. I think that the January 6th committee hearings have had a depressive effect on, I think, especially older Republicans when it comes to, Rick, they're old enough to remember, a party I knew. You may not have been a fan of Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush, but they were, and they don't see this as that party anymore. Gas prices are starting to come down, as we saw. Looks like Senator Manchin from down in West Virginia is actually going to sign on to a deal. And so I think that there is good momentum. I think also one thing you noted about President Biden is President Biden has, low approval ratings. I don't think we should deny that, but it does not seem to be translating, at least in this moment, into electoral hardship for Democratic candidates. And I think that's an important thing.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. I remember Reagan. I grew up during the Reagan era. No, I wasn't a fan of his policies, but I didn't have the kind of disdain that we see for politicians today. I respected him. I respected H.W. Bush. Didn't vote for him, but I had respect for them. And we're talking about a different era that I'm pining to go back to, where we're fighting over issues, we're fighting over policy, and not over dehumanizing someone you disagree with.
Yeah, well, that started, in the mid 1990s under Newt Gingrich, right, where he understood fundamentally how to nationalize an election and how to make every federal election about issues that typically Republicans want to talk about and Democrats have not always been the best at countering. And I think you're right about this, Rick. When it comes to culture wars, Republicans like to start them and Democrats like to lose them. I think that's a little bit different this time. I think that on the abortion issue, because it is so, there's a broad feeling amongst likely voters, right, that this is a net negative for women in America. And then I think we start to see some of the fallout from these things. The little girl over, next door in Ohio, or, stories of women going into the hospital with ectopic pregnancies where they've hemorrhaged. These are having real world effects. And so I think in some ways the Republicans caught the car, they're the dog that caught the car.
Yeah. Now you said that Republicans like to fight over issues that Democrats like to lose. I look at Adam Kinzinger's tweet today, going after Vice President Harris for her, saying that going through her pronouns and saying that she's wearing a blue dress and that she's a woman, to a room full of blind people, and him saying this is why the left can't win elections, and everybody immediately jumped on him. Without understanding what he was saying. You don't put yourself in this position to give the right the kind of fodder to go after you with. He wasn't saying don't be good to these communities, but don't say this kind of stuff to give ammunition to the other side, is what I think he was trying to say.
Oh, I think that's probably right. I think both the White House's release of that, I think, was inartful because they didn't provide any context. When I saw it too, I thought I don't know, because again, I didn't understand why she was describing the clothes she was wearing. Because why would you do that unless, again, you were at a table full of blind people, in which case it makes perfect sense. I think that Kinzinger is right, even if it's not a popular opinion, that wokeism, or whatever you're going to call it, is not broadly a popular sort of mindset for Americans. I don't think most folks, Rick, with some notable exceptions, and in your literal neighborhood, wake up hoping to be their worst self every day. And I don't think people like having it necessarily put in their face every day. That does not necessarily mean we don't have significant issues across both, racial and economic boundaries that we must confront head on. But that, as you know, it's very hard to convince somebody to at least accept your opinion as valid if the first thing and only thing you ever do is tell them what a bad person they are to start with.
Yeah, I mean, we're in very interesting times now. I'm sure you saw the president's speech yesterday, where he laid out his vision for the next. Well, after a long litany of whining and complaining about past grievances, laid out his vision for what he hopes the next president's able to do. Kind of a law and order speech, which seems to me, as I took from it, usurping those states' rights that Republicans used to love so much, and giving, ultimate federal powers, going to federalize the National Guard, going to crack down on drug dealers, going to start executing people. Curious your thoughts. Does that speech give you a warm, fuzzy feeling?
No, it gives me a cold chill down my spine. I mean, it's not that different from the convention speech he gave in 2016. It's not that different from the inaugural speech he gave at the beginning of 2017. And now he's just reiterating his, and I think Stephen Miller, the ghoul that works for him, wrote that speech, this, American dystopian hellscape that, his folks desperately want to believe in. And, it is a law and order speech. But when, we can all agree, I think, Rick, that homelessness, especially in dense urban areas, is endemic and a significant issue with which we should deal, and we're not taking it seriously. I don't think anybody's taking it seriously, particularly. But the idea of setting up camps, outside of major cities, brings back an awful lot of bad memories, and I think is the kind of thing that where Trump is now just veering into the weird and bizarre. He's always been strange. He's always been crazy. But now the things he's asking for, or talking about, are getting more and more extreme. But that may be true of the people who support him as well.
No, it's crazy. But, I think what you just said is across the board reality. We're not dealing with any of our real problems. We're still throwing pies at each other while we haven't raised the minimum wage in 13 years. We haven't done anything really, substantial on healthcare or education, and we still got a debt crisis. There's so many problems that just seem to keep piling up, and we're still just eating each other.
Well, I think we're eating each other. That's true, but I think also when it comes to eating, the best way to eat an elephant, metaphorically anyway, is one bite at a time. Which is, yes, we have a lot of systemic issues because of the polarization, but also because, we are in many ways, Rick, a country in denial. We don't want to have to deal with these problems. We don't want to have to deal with this idea. I mean, to your point about the minimum wage, if Democrats in Congress said they wanted to raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to some, I don't know what the definition is literally of living wage right now, Rick, but the business community would go bananas. And, then the libertarians would come in and say, oh, you have to work your way up. I mean, that's all well and good, in an Ayn Rand novel. That doesn't really work for somebody who's working at Starbucks for, $11.50 an hour. Now, wages, I think, have increased, which is good. But I think that's as much due to a shortage of workers as opposed to workers being able to live on, something that they can take home, try and put something away, try and buy a home, try and even build some level of stability financially, which I think is so far out of reach for far too many Americans. Excuse me.
Yeah, well, the numbers they go into, had the minimum wage kept up with inflation from the late 1960s till today, it'd be about $14 an hour. Had it kept up with productivity, it'd be close to $26 an hour. Those are the numbers, and yet it's still $7.25, and I have no idea how anyone lives on that. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show.
Well, and I mean, look, and Rick, I hate to interrupt, but just we are the most westernized post-industrial economy in the world, right? The largest economy the world has ever seen. And the idea that, people are supposed to live on the cost of a large latte, right, every hour just seems, again, disparate from reality, to say the least.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those things that's it's angering and frustrating and all of that combined. But we've had 3 presidents that have been able to raise the minimum wage. Reagan didn't want to do it. Obama couldn't do it, and Trump, there was no way he was going to do it. And now we're in another term of Biden. I don't think it's going to happen in his term either. This is not good stuff. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Make sure you check out the work that they do at lincolnproject.com. I want to get your thoughts on this third party that is evidently forming. I don't know if you've seen this yet.
Sure.
Andrew Yang and Christy Todd Whitman are coming together with the Forward Party. I'm curious, given this idea that Democrats might have a shot of holding on to the Senate, that do you think this hurts or helps the effort in 24 for Democrats or Republicans? How do you see this breaking out?
Well, in full disclosure, I used to be chief strategist for one of the 3 groups that came together today to do this, and I spent 2 years and about $2 million trying to found a party. We got exactly 1 ballot line in 1 state, Rick. That was New York. And it will disappear this November because the Democrats decided they didn't want any more competition. This is a very hard thing to do in the United States. We are not a parliamentary system, right? Where in a state legislature or in Congress, if it was the Republicans, the Democrats, the Greens, the Libertarians, and now the forwards, everybody would get a percentage of votes, right? They'd get to send that percentage of the body to Washington, D.C. or state capitol. Also, the two parties, both Republican and Democrat, make it incredibly difficult for new entrants, right? They put up ballot access laws, that's what it's called, to avoid having more competition. Do I think the political system needs more competition? I think it does. But then I think the last part too is all 50 states have their own rules about how you can qualify a new party. And some of them, like Utah, where I live, you basically fill out some paperwork, name some officers, and open a bank account, and voila, you're done. In California, it's a $12 or $13 million proposition. In a place like Iowa, you can only do it, during presidential election cycles. So it's a very Byzantine and complicated process. But I think the broader issue for all of this, Rick, is that each of these parties, and I was guilty of it too, they want to take a little bit of the left and a little bit of the right, and they want to make everybody feel better. And they say, we're going to compromise, we're going to come together, we're going to work together. And it's this triangulation. The problem is and I say this with all due respect to the people that are doing it, because I know many of them, is that it's not backed in belief, right? If you think back to the last major party we had come out in this country, it was in 1854. It was called the Republican Party.
Right.
They had one goal, to get rid of slavery, to abolish slavery. It was a hateful institution. It was an amoral institution, and it was one that must be destroyed within the boundaries of the United States. Now, it became other things as it went, right? But it had a founding belief system. And I think what you see now is that voters understand when they're being pandered to, and this feels a lot like pandering. I think the other problem, too, is that Andrew Yang, failed Democratic presidential candidate, Christy Todd Whitman, former governor of New Jersey, I have an immense amount of respect for. But, Governor Whitman hasn't been in office in like 22 years. Andrew Yang has never been elected to anything, was an interesting blip, I thought, in the Democratic primary of 2020. But who else are they going to bring to this? Because the two-party system is entrenched. Now, listen, I travel the country, Rick. Nobody likes either party. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure that this is the answer, and I'm not sure when it comes to 2024, what the impact is, especially, and I say this, there was a story in this outlet Puck about the fact that another group, No Labels, is raising $50 million to run an independent presidential candidate in 2024. So if that's the case, then you could see, as wild and woolly a deal in 24 as we've seen since 92, and that frankly wasn't that exciting.
Yeah, if I was going to start a third party, it'd be a labor party, because to your point, a single issue, making people's lives better wages, hours, conditions. For me, that's the way forward. Before I let you go, I wanted to get some of your thoughts on some of the stories coming out around Donald Trump. Evidently, he's talking about suing CNN for defamation, and evidently the RNC is threatening that if he runs for president, they're not going to pay his legal bills anymore. Any thoughts on those?
He will never actually sue CNN because I think, was it the New York Times or the Washington Post, had 100,000 documented lies he had told. So he is by definition a liar, even in the most objective sense. And also, he doesn't want discovery, right? He doesn't want CNN crawling around in his business. So that's just something to try and throw some red meat. The RNC, I think, is sick of paying his bills, Rick. I think they're sick of paying his legal bills, and they know that they're going to mount as the January 6th stuff moves down the road, and they don't want to be on the hook for it if he's indicted while he's president, because that will be tens of millions of dollars. I don't think they want to be on the hook for it at all. But I think that's the one thing they have going for them. Now, let's be clear, Rick. If he runs for president and he tells them, like, you're going to pay my legal bills, they're going to pay his legal bills.
Why are they paying his legal bills is my question.
It was, as I understand it, it was a deal he made with them before he left office, was that I could be wrong about this, Rick. I think if they wanted to use his name for fundraising, they had to pay his legal bills.
Got it. That's right. So, that makes sense now. So maybe under the bus, and maybe this January 6th stuff will be it. Do you think Garland indicts at some point? Let me get that last question in.
I think he probably does. I think it'll be but I think his attorneys, right, his prosecutors are probably hard at work trying to figure out how to put the case together. And like any old good crime drama, right, they'll start with the little fish and they'll work to the bigger fish.
There you go. Reed, I appreciate the time. Always great talk with you. Always insightful. Good stuff.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks so much, Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, lincolnproject.com, the website. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. Labor leader Mother Mary Harris Jones was leading a march of children laborers to President Theodore Roosevelt's summer home in New York. The long march had began 20 days before in Philadelphia. Mother Jones was hoping to draw national attention to the plight of child workers. The action caught the public's attention, and across the nation, newspapers reported on the March of the Mill Children. All the way in Leadville, a town in the mountains of Colorado west of Denver, the Herald Democrat carried the story of Mother Jones's East Coast March. The paper's July 27th article began, quote, "It is a pathetic spectacle. That little army of Mother Jones, marching through the broiling heat of summer, lay a petition before the president. She says truly that her errand is as vital as any which takes persons to Oyster Bay. She comes to please the cause of the child laborers, and to emphasize her protest, has with her several score of ill-clad, puny children, the result of the enforced work of these children in factories. When the children's march reached the president's door 2 days later, the president was not there to meet them. Yet the march had sparked national attention. In 1904, the National Child Labor Committee formed to take action on the issue. Pennsylvania passed tougher child labor restrictions the next year, but federal protections would have to wait until the next President Roosevelt. The passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, finally included nationwide limits to child labor.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Yeah, Reed made a comment there that sending people into labor camps or homeless camps, is something that maybe we shouldn't do. You've got a Senate candidate, this guy named Jim Layman, who is proposing sending undocumented immigrants. Now remember, you got the Trump kids saying, hey, we can take those homeless people, move them out of the cities and put them in the homeless camps, way out of town, out of sight, out of mind. Now you've got Senate candidates saying, no, what we do with those illegals is we put them out in the Pacific Ocean, in labor camps out in the Pacific Ocean. He said, those islands that we spent blood and treasure securing back in World War II, a few of those out there, I think they need to go out and do 5 years hard time busting rocks out there, making them into gravel for their food. Just get rid of them out of this country if they're so bad they've been illegally crossed and committed crimes. He said he wouldn't stop with, he said it would stop undocumented immigrants from coming back again. That's his view. And what's interesting to me is, and I keep coming back to, remember, these are the people who tell us that this is a Christian nation. Remember that. I mean, this is the important part of this. These are the God-fearing people who want to do the most horrible, abusive things to others. Mean-spirited, hateful kind of things. All in the name of some religion that I don't understand. And it's angering. And for me, it's part of the distraction. It's part of a fight that I don't think we should have to have, because I hope we're a better country than this. And I know that, right now there are people going, hey, this is how the Democrats are going to hold on to the House, and how they're going to grab the Senate, because you've got all these really way out wackadoodles who are running for office. I look at where I live in Pennsylvania. that I always thought was a relatively sane place. The fact that Doug Mastriano, who I view as an out-and-out Nazi, is running neck and neck with Josh Shapiro frightens me, because he is the most extreme of the most extreme. His positions on issue after issue are the most extreme and hateful. And yet couched in that little frame of Christianity, good white Christianity, not that other kind or any other version, that most extreme version. And this is where the fear comes in, because Mitt Romney's not wrong when he says be careful what you wish for. You put these crazy people out there, some of them could win. And what will that mean for our country? I mean, I look at Marjorie Three Names. I look at Lauren Boebert. Imagine if they were no longer the most extreme. Imagine the next, because I remember thinking, I don't think anyone could be worse than Stephen King from Iowa, or Louis Gohmert. I don't think anybody can get worse than that. Hold my beer, because here comes Matt Gaetz and his comments recently. Oh, on the Matt Gaetz front, remember we talked about this the other day? How he said, those people who are pro-choice, they're odious. No one's going to impregnate them. And he put out a picture of a woman, basically shaming her. Well, her organization's raised over $200,000 to fight for reproductive rights for women, and good for her, and good for her group. And I hope folks will continue to give her more to help fight for that. Just to shove it up. This is that moment where the sane, the rational, the silent majority, we the people, need to come together and speak out. Because the lunatic fringe is out there. And I hate that. This is not the fight. This is not the segment I want. This is not the moment I want to be in. I want to be talking about, hey, how can we make lives better? This is why I started this. When I started this program, it was about, hey, how do we make lives better? Not how do we defend and hold on to what little we have left. Not how do we clutch on to what little is left of the 20th century. But how do we improve? How do we make lives better? How do we fight for better wages, hours, conditions, educational opportunity, retirement, you name it. How do we do that thing that Gomper said? What does labor want? More of the things that make our lives better, more of the opportunities to make manhood more noble, womanhood more beautiful, childhood more, instead of where we are in this constant defense of what's left. And look, this Supreme Court we've got, the 20th century is most certainly under attack. All of the progress of our grandparents and that generation, all on the chopping block. And they're not shy about it. This is the thing that's important. Pay attention to what they are saying to us. Listen to what they're telling us. Listen to the world that they want to create. It's a dangerous place. It's a scary place, especially if you don't conform with their narrow-minded views. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you're just joining us or missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, from iTunes to iHeart, Stitcher to Podbean, everywhere in between. Also, thericksmithshow.com.
Just in the past 48 hours, the Oak Fire has exploded in size.
State of emergency declared over new fire near Yosemite National Park.
The previously unprecedented, is now becoming routine.
Simultaneous global heat waves are now 6 times more frequent, thanks to global warming.
Thanks, global warming.
Plus, new study quantifies just how much climate damage rich nations have caused to poor ones.
All of that damage and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
According to CBS News, brutal and dangerous temperatures were felt from California to Massachusetts. Okay, CBS News, just say America.
Yep, this is your Green News Report.
That's like telling your partner, hey, before we get intimate, I should warn you I have this little rash from my right toe to my left ear.
Okay, Desi Doyen, yeah, it has been incredibly hot across, well, much of the entire country over the past few days,
Yes.
although it is beginning to cool down a bit in some of those places. That said, what do you got for us today?
Well, California Governor Gavin Newsom has declared a state of emergency, unlocking more federal support to help defray the costs of battling a new, fast-moving wildfire near Yosemite National Park that exploded in size over the weekend.
That's different than the one last week that was threatening those giant sequoias
Yes.
in Yosemite?
Yes, it's a new, different one, and the sequoias so far are okay.
Good.
State fire agency CAL FIRE says the new oak fire is exhibiting, quote, really unprecedented fire behavior.
Bad.
And in just 48 hours became the state's largest wildfire so far this year, burning out of control through tinder dry forests amid an historic drought and intense heat. It has forced the evacuation of at least 6,000 people in the surrounding areas at the height of the summer tourist season. The simultaneous record-setting extreme heat waves engulfing the northern hemisphere for weeks at a time this summer are causing massive crop losses. In Italy, the heat and drought have hammered the rice crop in some regions, especially concerning because Italy produces more than half of all the rice in Europe. Worse, Italy's mighty Po River is drying up, in turn allowing salt water from the Adriatic Sea to push an unprecedented 18 miles inland,
Really?
affecting both crops and drinking water supplies, as CBS News reports.
Rodolfo Laurenti works for the local water authority, which closely monitors the flow and salinity of water in the Po Delta. The moment of real climate crisis, he says, is 2022.
Wait, that's right now.
And now, new research concludes that multiple concurrent global heat waves are now occurring 6 times more frequently than they did in the past due to human-caused global warming. In an interview with PBS, climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann explains that global warming has raised the baseline temperature of the planet, and mounting evidence indicates that warming in the Arctic is slowing down the northern hemisphere jet stream that drives weather systems.
And what's happening is those systems are getting stuck in place. So the extreme heat that we've seen, the floods, the wildfires, the drought across the entire northern hemisphere this summer, part of what's going on is this sort of stuck jet stream pattern. It is something that we think is being made more frequent because of climate change.
I recall speaking with Dr. Mann about exactly that some years ago on the broadcast. Has climate change just messed up all of our weather patterns? He said it looks like that could be the case. It was before he actually did a study confirming that, yeah, that looks like it is the case.
And meanwhile, a new study has quantified just how much economic damage rich nations have caused in climate harm to poorer nations. Because industrialized nations have been emitting greenhouse gases for decades longer than poorer ones, researchers from Dartmouth University calculate that the world's 5 leading emitters of greenhouse gases have caused $6 trillion in global economic losses since 1990 from warming impacts caused by their emissions. The analysis finds the United States, the top historical emitter of all time, has caused nearly $2 trillion in climate damages to other countries since 1990.
We're number 1.
In other news, estimates of gasoline spilled from the Colonial Pipeline into a North Carolina nature preserve back in 2020 have been revised upwards again. In a legal settlement with the state, Colonial admits that the spill wasn't 64,000 gallons as originally estimated, but was actually 2 million gallons,
Oh, man.
8 times larger, and may have been leaking for 3 weeks undetected.
We always tell you that when you hear about an oil spill, it will always be larger than the the oil companies try to tell you at the beginning.
In the state settlement, Colonial will pay less than $5 million in fines.
Well, the cost of doing business.
For what is now the largest inland pipeline spill in U.S. history.
For much more on all of these stories, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the narrative that we keep hearing from the right, our cities are burning, crime is running rampant, those people are to blame. And look, Trump's speech at the America First Institute rally, whatever that was, whatever that crazy whiny speech was, hit all of the notes that made the MAGA people really happy. We're going to execute people. We're going to go get them and drag them out in the streets and public execution of drug dealers. Yeah, because I had that conversation, and look, that resonates with the crazy base. I'm here to share some thoughts about what really is going on in our cities and how we address it. I've asked Ben Jealous to come talk with us. Ben is the president of People for the American Way. He's also a professor of practice at the University of Pennsylvania, a New York Times best-selling author. His next book coming up is Never Forget Our People Were Always Free, published by HarperCollins. Ben, thanks for taking time for us.
Always good to be with you, Rick. Thank you for having me back on.
So we got this narrative going on. I hear it quite often that, you look at, places where our program is on in Chicago and Minneapolis and Milwaukee and, crime, Ben. Cities are just burning. And it's those Democrat cities, and it's those people, Ben. It's those people.
Since NAFTA was passed, 63,000 American factories have shuttered. It's basically a factory for every town in the country. And the reality is that, that was Bill Clinton and the Republican Party who really pushed that down everybody else's throat. I was a young organizer, AFL-CIO, stumping with the old head of the IBEW across the country trying to stop NAFTA. And, the misery that's in our cities, right? Whether you're in Cumberland, Maryland, which used to be the second largest city in my home state of Maryland, or you're in Baltimore, which is still the largest city in the state, the despair that you see, people hooked on meth, hooked on heroin, hooked on opiate painkillers, really rises in the places that we de-industrialize. And the irony is that in this moment, right, we have inflation surging in America. Inflation's not surging because of demand side issues as in the past. Inflation this time, inflation is about the supply side nightmare that was it's been America during COVID, where we don't make stuff anymore. And the conversation we should be having about revitalizing our cities starts honestly with rebuilding the manufacturing base of our country and creating a pathway again. We're frank about it. Yes, for women, but honestly, it's really the men who have been downwardly mobile in the last 20 years, white and black, since NAFTA was passed. Because if you're a white guy, my uncle runs a lumber yard up in northern New Hampshire, or you're a black guy like my cousin works at FedEx in Baltimore, and now is a greeter, national car rental. You're guys who don't have 4-year degrees. The pathway for good employment, where you can raise a family and be upwardly mobile and buy a little cottage at the beach or on the lake or whatever, is so much narrower than it's ever been in this country.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's stuff that we talk about all the time. And it's the reason that back in April of 2016,
I knew Donald Trump was going to win because I grew up in Cleveland. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. And for me, growing up in the 70s as a kid, one of the narratives that I grew up understanding is, one of the ways out of those projects was a union job, one of those jobs at Ford or Chevy or the hundreds of feeder plants that fed into those factories, which are now basically all gone. We wiped all those away during the 80s and 90s, and that anger was there. And I went home during that period in April, and I remember all of my relatives, the basket of deplorables that they are, going, hey, I'm going to register to vote for the first time in my life because Donald Trump's bringing jobs back. We're going to recreate that era of prosperity that I remember. And I think that's part of why he's risen the way he has. But also the anger.
But let's talk about this because, look, it's my family and it's your family. And the reality is that you had Hillary Clinton and a bunch of corporate elites, calling, our cousins, our families deplorables. And the reality is that, honestly, it's rural whites in places like, Maine and Mississippi who disproportionately were shipped off to Iraq and Afghanistan. They come home and, Walmart's as good as it gets in a lot of places, and that's honestly not that good. And sure as hell was as good as Granddad did at the factory. And, folks have been screwed. And honestly, my frustration with the Democratic Party is we don't solve problems for working people anymore. I mean, WTF, the federal minimum wage is still $7.25. Who the hell can, survive, support anybody, let alone a family on $7.25? But that's like a real wage in places like Mississippi. And yet, the reality is that the party of FDR, has abandoned working people. We're addicted to corporate cash. And so, yes, Donald Trump can literally do what he did. What you and I saw in 2016. He literally stole the talking points of Bernie Sanders. You had a guy running for president of the Republican Party against NAFTA. He had no intention of doing anything except for making crony capitalism work for him even more. And, he screwed our cousins, who voted for him. I'm pretty sure that my favorite uncle voted for Donald Trump, back in 2016. But he had no intention of actually, saving steelworker jobs, let alone bringing them back. He had no intention of creating a better healthcare system, as he promised, echoing Bernie, praising Canada and all that stuff that Trump did. He has no intention of doing anything good for America. What he does plan to do is make his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as rich as possible, his daughter as rich as possible, himself as rich as possible, get more money from the Saudis, billions poured into his family, because Lord knows anybody who would give him credit in America who's done business with him before doesn't want to give them money again. The guy's filed for bankruptcy 7 times. He's a swindler. And so that's the part that really frustrates me when you see him go on a racist tirade, as a guy, with a black guy with a white dad, with working class white cousins. I know the game he's playing is cynical, AF, and it's literally designed to swindle working class white people, just like he swindled New York City when he was a, bankruptcy addicted developer who was also frankly, addicted to government subsidy. And so that's the thing. It's like, look, if you actually had a plan to solve, the public safety crisis that exists in many cities, I'd be all ears. But you don't. You want to push this kind of Starsky and Hutch, tough guy approach to John Wayne approach. It doesn't actually make our cities safer.
Yeah, but
using people's rights doesn't make our cities safer. It actually makes them more violent.
Yeah, but I think, Ben, and I look at, you're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Ben Jealous. He's the president of People for the American Way. You might want to check out their website, pfaw.org, peopleforamericanway.org. We'll get links out on social media. But if you look at what he said, what's frightening to me, he laid out a vision for a new Republican Congress to enact really wide sweeping emergency powers for the next president. Who could go after anyone that he views as a weak, foolish, stupid governor, his words, so that he could fire radical and racist prosecutors, again his words. federalize the National Guard, make them do law enforcement duties, have stop and frisk policies, and impose death sentences on drug dealers, expedite trials. This is all un-American stuff. This is all fascistic stuff, Ben.
Yep. Well, no, and the crazy part is this is literally the only American president who has called his supporters to Washington to conduct a coup and literally hunt police officers in the hall of Congress. Like those, and beat a police officer, Michael Fanone within an inch of his life. I mean, the reality is what it reveals, honestly, is that we have too many authoritarians leading law enforcement and in law enforcement. One of the smartest things any city can do, Ithaca, New York, kind of, if you will, the town that is the laboratory for Cornell University, instituted something 8 years ago, and it's been replicated in other cities to great success. And it's this: authoritarian personalities are approximately 10% of the U.S. population, but they are overwhelmingly the people who aspire to be police officers. In Ithaca, following the recommendations of the Center for Policing Equity, and we push this. We've been promoting this in a report called All Safe, Transforming Public Safety, that we have out now, and we're working with multiple mayors across the country to move this. So you know what? The traditional psychological test for applicants to the police force is insufficient. All it really tests is, are you tough enough to, kill somebody and not crack? What we actually need to know is, why do you want to be a police officer? What's really motivating you to apply? Do you believe when you walk into a room that everybody owes you respect? Do you fixate and fascinate about guns in a way that's quasi-sexual? And so these are the types of things that they dig into with these people psychologically while they're hooked up to a lie detector. And in the city of Ithaca, what they've been going after for 8 years is, are you too authoritarian for us to trust you to keep everybody safe? 3 out of 4 applicants for the Ithaca Police Department who passed the traditional psychological, the physical, and every other exam that you need to pass to go into the academy, the last thing they took was this test: are you too authoritarian for us to trust you? 3 out of 4 fail. 3 out of 4 fail.
Wow.
The interesting thing, I remember being in Rockford, Illinois, after literally the cop who was that cop, the one who killed multiple of his neighbors, was totally out of control, pursued a man who literally had a bench warrant out for domestic disturbance, no violence. Just he and his wife had gotten into a shouting match the night before. And when the guy saw it was that cop, he ran, and he took refuge in a church. And that officer, disregarded millennia of churches being a sanctuary and pursued the man into the church. Again, there was, no violence, just shouting involved here. It was bench warrant for domestic disturbance. And the man took refuge in the church daycare, and the police officer pursued him into the daycare. And then the man hid in the broom closet, and the police officer said, "Come out with your hands up." And the man came out with his hands up, and without having cleared the room of children, that police officer filled this man's body with 8 bullets and murdered him in front of 2-year-olds and 4-year-olds. Wow. So Reverend Jackson and I show up a couple weeks later, a month later, because the 2-year-old and 4-year-olds are losing their hair because they literally have no safe place left for them. Because if you're not safe in your neighborhood, and you're not safe in your church, and you're not safe in your church daycare, and you're not safe with a police officer, where are you safe? The kids didn't have the words, but they understood. And I went off about how we got to get bullies off the police force. And this little old white lady, 75 years old, came up to me at the end of the mass meeting, and she said, "President Jealous, may I have a word?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. What's up?" And she said, I don't see a man at my local police precinct who didn't come through my classroom or my playground or my hallway as a boy. And I'll tell you one thing: I don't see the old bullies from the schoolhouse. I see the kids who were bullied. And that's that's the reality. Is that, look, 1 out of 4 people who apply to be a police officer in Ithaca, New York, really are doing it for the right reasons, and we need them on the force. But the 3 out of 4 who are there because literally they're still processing pain from disappointment to their childhood, and man, they got a gun now, so you're going to respect them, and nobody's going to bully them, and they're going to shoot you if you don't do what they say. Like, those folks, honestly, Ithaca's safer, and America would be safer if we followed Ithaca's footsteps and said, you're just not going to be a cop. Because I'm sorry, buddy, you're not doing this to make people safe. You're doing this because at the end of the day, you would like to have the license to kill people who don't respect you.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and one I have thought of many times. Because I think back to those days in school, and that is not a wrong perspective. So, last question I've got for you, because look, yeah. I've said numerous times in this program, I support the police. My position has always been I support the police when they're not wrong. That right. is the middle ground between I'm absolutely 100% supportive no matter what, and defund the police. I support them when they're not wrong.
Which is the lamest slogan ever created in America.
Absolutely.
But yes, yeah.
How do we support them and get good people and protect them and do all those things? How do we do that? What should we be doing?
I mean, here's the thing: you got to recruit the right people, and you got to train them in the right way. Who are the right people? The people who want to do it for the right reason. And we all know police officers like this. We all know law enforcement officers. That was my grandfather. He was a probation officer. That was my best friend's dad. He was a California highway patrolman. I grew up in a community of law enforcement officers. That's why I became a criminologist. I'm the only American civil rights leader who's a criminologist. And so you got to recruit the right people to do the job in the right way, and then you got to train them. I remember the time that my best friend's dad shot somebody. And all the pain of Vietnam literally came flooding back into him, and he resigned from the police force 2 years earlier than he planned to. He had been eligible for retirement, but I think he wanted to make it to 30, and he retired after 28 years. And the reality was he shot the guy. He did it the right way. He did it for the right reasons. He was a bank robber. He shot him in the leg. He was a marksman instructor. He turned down every promotion. He's the longest-serving beat officer in the California Highway Patrol. But even shooting sort of, the bad guy the right way in order to disable him, not kill him, so they could arrest a violent, dangerous bank robber, for this man had so much psychological trauma because, he basically had come of age at 3 tours as a Green Beret in Vietnam, and he never wanted to shoot another human being again. And he had to on his job, and it gave me insight into the trauma that is for the officer. Now put yourself in the shoes of an officer who has not been trained to de-escalate. That was one day at the academy. Maybe they were sick. Maybe they just forgot it was a long time ago. Has not been trained, in non-lethal or less lethal, options. Has just simply, been trained to shoot to kill, and then you make the wrong call. You shoot the guy with the cell phone in his hand. You thought it was a gun. You shoot, somebody who reached into their, like Philando Castile, who reached into their glove compartment to show you that they had a concealed carry permit and a license to have their gun. Whatever it is, imagine the trauma that does to you.
Yeah.
You just killed somebody for the wrong reason. And the reality is that many of these cases are officers who are poorly trained. And so the combination of letting too many people in who are in it for the wrong reasons and then training all of them poorly, those are things we can fix, and we just got to fix it.
I agree. It's a good place to start. But Ben, I appreciate the time and the thoughts as always. Great talking with you. I hope you'll come back again real soon.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you for what you do for our country, brother.
Good stuff. I appreciate the time. Ben Jealous, president of People for the American Way. Make sure to check out their website, pfaw.org. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the work that they do. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our Labor History in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible, 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So The Guardian has an interesting piece. Story about a lobbyist group, story about a power company, a story about greed, a story about, lining the pockets of corporate America, an American story. You could make like, a good afternoon special out of this. And a story of taking out a Democratic senator who had the audacity to propose that, landlords be able to put solar panels on the top of roofs to be able to, power their tenants, properties directly without going through the Florida Power and Light people, not paying the man. And this is one of those things that I've said, the reason that we put, solar panels in our house. The idea is maybe we don't have to keep paying every month. And it's the reason that we haven't gone full solar. It's the reason that as a country, we don't get to do this stuff. It's the reason we can't have nice things. But evidently they've got a bunch of leaked memos that figured out how, and I think we've talked about this story, it was a while ago, but there was a state senator, Jose Javier Rodriguez, who lost his bid for re-election because they put up someone who they basically paid to run, whose name was Rodriguez, just like his, to split the vote so that he would lose. Nefarious stuff. And the idea was, as in the memo, to make this guy's life a living hell, because that's what the CEO of Florida Power and Light wrote to two of his vice presidents about this state senator. How dare he, cut into our profit margins? And within minutes, evidently, one of these vice presidents forwarded it to the CEO of this lobbying company, who then went into full gear to go and bribe this person to run against this person. And it was all the wheels started to spin. And what this article goes into is talking about how powerful these lobby groups have become, how, these big monopolies like Florida Power and Light and other utilities, maybe a gas company that, controls the gas prices, maybe, a big corporation, how the lobbying that they do basically stops any legislation that we would want and need, and how our system has been just completely perverted. And I go back to what I talked about earlier, this Trump supporter that I had a conversation with, saying, look, the reason that we don't get to agree on things, the reason that we're divided, is these people spend millions of dollars focus group testing, think tank approving messages to divide us, to tear us apart, to figure out our fault lines, so that the things that we agree on, we never get to talk about. The things that we want passed, like a minimum wage increase, never happens. The things that we want for our kids, like education and healthcare and safe neighborhoods and safe schools, and we never really get to address, because, well, they've got an agenda, and their agenda is what? Lining their pockets. It's the reason we can't really effectively go after climate change. Too many entrenched interests. It's the reason why we can't put solar panels on every new house being built. Why we can't get every new house off the grid and energy independent. Because you got to continue to make those monthly payments. You got to keep that passive income from corporate America. It's why we can't have nice things. It's the reason we can't. So that it's the reason we can't have nice things. It's so they can. There's the reality. It's the reason why we can't have a home, so they can have 6. The reason we can't have a little boat to go fishing with is so they can have big yachts. That's the reality. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get yours. Find ours, iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, all of them. Back after this.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. Labor leader Mother Mary Harris Jones was leading a march of children laborers to President Theodore Roosevelt's summer home in New York. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1903. Labor leader Mother Mary Harris Jones was leading a march of children laborers to President Theodore Roosevelt's summer home in New York. The long march had began 20 days before in Philadelphia. Mother Jones was hoping to draw national attention to the plight of child workers. The action caught the public's attention, and across the nation, newspapers reported on the March of the Mill Children. All the way in Leadville, a town in the mountains of Colorado west of Denver, the Herald Democrat carried the story of Mother Jones's East Coast March. The paper's July 27th article began, quote, "It is a pathetic spectacle. That little army of Mother Jones, marching through the broiling heat of summer, lay a petition before the president. She says truly that her errand is as vital as any which takes persons to Oyster Bay. She comes to please the cause of the child laborers, and to emphasize her protest, has with her several score of ill-clad, puny children, the result of the enforced work of these children in factories. When the children's march reached the president's door 2 days later, the president was not there to meet them. Yet the march had sparked national attention. In 1904, the National Child Labor Committee formed to take action on the issue. Pennsylvania passed tougher child labor restrictions the next year, but federal protections would have to wait until the next President Roosevelt. The passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, signed by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, finally included nationwide limits to child labor.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Republican politicos are all over Joe Biden for failing to stop inflation. Perhaps you wonder, though, what these squawkers would do if they were in charge. No need to wonder. Just look back to 1974, when Americans were being pummeled by price spikes that topped 12%, nearly double what we're enduring today. But by gollies, President Gerald Ford and his Republican contingent in Congress met the challenge head-on with a new magical program of economic uplift they called WIN, Whip Inflation Now. But it was nothing, just a political slogan with no magic and no action behind it. Price controls, antitrust action? No. GOP Inc. didn't want to offend, much less punish, corporate titans for a little profiteering, so they shifted the blame for inflation to consumers, demanding that families just say no to price gouging. Ford himself went on national TV, urging fellow citizens to join him in buying, quote, only those products and services priced at or below present levels. The core of the Republican program, then, was telling hard-hit wage earners to battle the monopolistic behemoths of big oil, big pharma, big food et al. On their own by simply refusing to pay inflated prices for the gasoline, medicines, groceries, and such that, hello, they had to have. As a reward, everyone who signed a form promising to be an inflation fighter was sent a nifty win button indicating their patriotic participation. Sure enough, Americans responded enthusiastically with an avalanche of ridicule. Even Ford's top economic advisor was whopper-jawed by the GOP's idea that the substance of their policy was a political button. It was surreal. I said to myself, this is unbelievable stupidity.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, a new AP North poll out this week shows that 2/3 of Americans would like to see term limits at the Supreme Court level. And just in time, Hank Johnson in the House has introduced a piece of legislation that would do just that. That would put term limits of 18 years on Supreme Court justices, and evidently Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island will be introducing a similar bill in the future. Not quite sure how I feel about it, but I'll tell you, after the last several decisions coming out of the Supreme Court, some changes have to be made. And here to share some thoughts on what that should be, what it should look like, what should be happening, and why we need to do it, I've asked my good friend Ian Millhiser to come share some thoughts. Ian is a senior correspondent over at Vox.com, the website. Ian, thanks for taking time for us.
It's good to be here. Thanks so much.
So what do you think of this? 2/3 of the American people now say, hey, term limits on these justices, this is kind of crazy. Is this in response of Roe? Is this growing? Has this been growing for a while? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the polls are fairly consistently showing that the public is fed up with the Supreme Court and, very surprised by the right-wing turn it's taken. We aren't just seeing support for term limits. I saw a poll recently that showed, I think, 47% of the country, a plurality, supports packing the court, adding additional seats to the court and filling them with Biden appointees, which is like dropping a nuclear bomb on the court. Like, that's the most potent thing that Congress could do in response. The public's mad. Now, I don't know if term limits is the right solution, in part because I think it's constitutionally very difficult to do. The Constitution says that justices get to keep their offices for life, and I could think of ways around that, but ultimately the question of whether you can get around that would be decided by the Supreme Court. So, I don't know if that is if that's the best solution just for constitutional reasons, but I think that people are really looking for solutions right now.
So the solution is to go through the Supreme Court that is already radical and fairly extreme in my view. So that's our hope, that the Supreme Court is going to right itself. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, there are things that there are actually lots of things that Congress can do. So, like, the biggest tool in Congress's arsenal, one that there aren't the votes for right now in Congress, but if we keep seeing outrages, maybe there could be, is adding seats to the court. So, you could add 4 or 6 seats to the court, and then all of a sudden, instead of having a 6-3 Republican majority, you'd have a 7-6 or a 9-6 Democratic majority. Congress has at least some power to decide what the court's jurisdiction is, and so Congress could pass a law saying that the court just isn't allowed to hear certain kinds of cases. Congress controls the court's budget. The Constitution does say that the justices get to keep their own salaries for as long as they stay in their office, but it says nothing about the law clerks. It says nothing about that fancy building that if Congress wanted to, it could move the Supreme Court to an office park in Nome, Alaska. It could take away its entire staff. So, the Congress has a lot of tools at its disposal if it really wants to go to war with a rogue court.
Yeah. Now look, the packing the court thing, everybody I talk to, that would be, as you said, the nuclear bomb here, and it would be hyper political. What would stop the other side from just doing that and this be a situation where, every time the pendulum swings from the Democrats in control to Republicans in control, you end up having the court swinging back and forth because they keep packing the court until we have 1,000 justices.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is the biggest argument. That is probably the strongest argument against court packing. That's exactly what would happen. Now, if the court continues to behave in this way, I mean, one thing that has surprised me is there really was a massive public reaction, not just against the Dobbs decision overruling Roe v. Wade, but I think that the public understands politically that, the Democratic Party is the party that supports abortion rights. The Republican Party is the party that, supported overruling Roe v. Wade. And even with the high inflation, even with President Biden being a fairly unpopular president right now, I've seen a number of post-Roe polls showing that the generic congressional ballot went from favoring Republicans to favoring Democrats. I think Politico had a poll this morning showing showing Democrats up 3 points in the generic congressional ballot. So, like, the easiest way to break the logjam is to avoid that problem is if the court becomes so unpopular, if the Republican justice becomes so unpopular that they drag down the Republican Party with them, then you could potentially pass a court packing bill and you don't have to worry about Republicans retaliating because they won't be able to get back into office, at least in their current incarnation. Or, maybe Democrats can hold on to power long enough that they can fix the problem the old-fashioned way by just waiting for Thomas and Alito, who are both in their 70s, to die and get replaced by a Democrat. But you're right. I mean, we are talking about a seriously out-of-whack court right now, and that means that, like, we are also talking about solutions that are imperfect solutions that could have a lot of side effects we don't like.
Yeah. Now, what's frustrating and what bothers me is, you've got one party that is in favor of the 20th century and one party that is not. And we've got a court that's attempting to repeal the 20th century. That's a problem. I don't want to get into we want Democratic nominees or Republican nominees so much as I want people who respect, the law. Remember when John Roberts said balls and strikes? Remember that thing called, how do you lawyer people talk? Something about the stars and decided.
Oh, stare decisis.
Yeah, that thing. There used to be something like that where there was that P word too, precedent. Wasn't that an important word in your jargon? That doesn't seem to be there anymore. It seems to be thrown out the window because we're making stuff up as we go, it seems.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is what frightens me about this court. So stare decisis is, the Latin term that means something like to rest on what has already been decided. And the idea is that once the court has decided an issue, like, they should be very, very, very reluctant to roll that back and to say, no, actually, we meant something else. And there's lots of reasons for that. I mean, one reason is that people order their lives assuming that the law is going to be that way. I mean, people, women moved to Texas assuming that their reproductive rights were safe if they live in Texas. They may have bought a home in Texas. And now they've got to decide, like, oh, do I have to sell my home? Do I have to find a new job? Because I don't know that physically I can get the health care I need if I remain here. You have businesses that make, huge investment decisions based on what they think the law is going to be in 10 years. And if it shifts, that means that, that business can suffer. That means a lot of people lose their jobs. You want to have stability in the law. And it is troubling that this court, I think what is going on is that you have a lot of ideologues who have been, the Federalist Society is very influential. It has taught them that a lot of the liberal decisions from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s were illegitimate, and it's time to roll them back. And what I think that they don't understand is, like, to sort of say it doesn't matter if something that the Supreme Court said in 1965 is correct or not. We are past the point where we can unravel that because people have ordered their lives on the assumption that this thing that was decided 50 years ago is the way things are. And we shouldn't change that just because Brett Kavanaugh wishes it had turned out differently.
No, and you and I have had the conversation numerous times. Things like minimum wage, things like maximum hour laws, things like safe working conditions. Those are things that are near and dear to my heart. Things we talk about here on the program often, all clearly under attack. But much worse than even that. I mean, the Roe overturning Roe, and I think it's going to get even worse in the coming term because if you're listening to the political rhetoric coming out of the right, it's getting much sharper, it's getting much meaner, it's getting much more theocratic. I don't know what the next term holds for our court.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you some of the things that it holds, and it's very scary. I mean, they are a number of race cases that the court has taken. I mean, one is that they're almost certainly going to strike down affirmative action in college admissions. That's been coming for a while. But I think, like, the most disturbing race case that they've taken is a case that would potentially allow racial gerrymanders or just make it much, much easier to have racial gerrymanders. So you wind up with maps that are much more skewed to the Republican Party, which tends to be the party that white people favor. There is an enormous voting case dealing with essentially whether or not states have to follow their own constitutions when they write election law. So, the federal constitution says a few things about voting rights, but often state constitutions say a ton about voting. I mean, in Pennsylvania, where you are, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court a few years ago said, look, our state constitution doesn't permit gerrymandering. And so, we got much fairer congressional maps out of that. And, if states don't have to obey their own, are allowed to defy their own constitution, there's anti-gerrymandering protections. There goes a ton of voting rights protections. And so, we are looking at a court, it's not just they don't respect stare decisis, the idea that you have to respect precedent. What I'm worried about is that they don't respect democracy.
No, that's the scary part. And look, there's some of the stuff coming out. I mean, you look at the guy running for governor here in Pennsylvania who, there's talk of, if we don't like the results of the election, we'll just change it.
Right.
That's downright frightening. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Ian Millhiser. He's a senior correspondent over at Vox, Vox.com, their website. He's also the author of The Agenda, How a Republican Supreme Court is Reshaping America. And you wrote that book, how long ago?
I wrote that book maybe a year and a half ago, and I wish I didn't have to toot my own horn, but I predicted several things in the book. I predicted that the court would take a much more expansive approach to what they call religious liberty, letting religious conservatives exempt themselves from laws that they don't want to follow, and that happened. I predicted that the court was going to assert itself at the head of much of the executive branch. So, the EPA has all kinds of power. The Department of Labor has all kinds of power to determine things like who gets overtime pay. The Department of Health and Human Services has all kinds of powers to decide what sorts of vaccines, what sorts of treatments, what sort of medicine your health insurer is required to cover. And the Supreme Court has given itself a veto power over all of it, in this EPA decision that they handed down this term. And first of all, that's not democratic. I mean, the executive branch is supposed to be led by the executive. It's supposed to be led by the President of the United States, who is someone we can vote out of office if we don't like the job that they are doing. You can't vote Supreme Court justices out of office. You don't want them to have that kind of power because they're not accountable to anyone. But anyway, I predicted that was going to happen. It's happened. I predicted that there would be more attacks on the Voting Rights Act, and that has happened. So, we have a court that, I mean, despite the fact, I was able to predict these things. It's not because I'm some kind of genius.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, it's because they're telegraphing.
Exactly.
It's because they're actually very transparent about their agenda, and that agenda is very scary.
No, it's taking us back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder how far back these guys want to. I mean, some of them want to go back to 1936, before Social Security was considered constitutional, before the minimum wage was considered constitutional. I don't know if there's 5 votes for that. I think that there are 5 votes potentially to go back to the 1950s. When you didn't have the Voting Rights Act. When civil rights laws were very difficult to enforce. So it's a scary time under the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Now I did want to ask you because there's a story going around that John Roberts, was trying to lobby Brett Kavanaugh to be a little bit more incremental. That I'll be honest, I thought that I didn't think the Dobbs decision would go as far as it went. I thought there would be incremental change. They were going to kill Roe eventually. I didn't think it was going to come all in one felt swoop. But with the leak of the memo, I think, they didn't have much of a choice. I'm curious, you buy in any of this kind of lobbying that was going on?
I mean, inside John Roberts, there were 2 wolves. He is a very, very conservative Republican. But he also, a friend of mine who used to work in the Supreme Court building described him as the most professional person he's ever met in his life. Chief Justice Roberts believes that there's an order to things, that proper procedure should be followed. If the court announces that it's going to hear a case to decide whether or not 15-week bans are constitutional, then it should decide whether 15-week bans on abortion are constitutional and not whether Roe v. Wade should be overruled. in its entirety. So he does believe there should be process. Roberts is the epitome of lawful neutrality. But he's still extraordinarily conservative. And so I think the difference between Roberts and, the other 5 Republican appointees on the court is that, Sam Alito wants it all, and he wants it now. I think that John Roberts wanted to hand down a narrow opinion in 2022 saying 15-week bans are allowed. And then in 2023, he probably would have written the opinion overruling Roe v. Wade. So, John Roberts is not our friend. He's not a friend of reproductive rights. Very, very conservative man. But what I think sets him aside from the other Republican appointees is that Roberts believes that there are procedural norms. Those norms do constrain the courts. And someone like Alito, I don't think he really believes that.
Yeah, and any ideas on who? I mean, there's the Jenny Thomas thought. I actually had someone say it was Alito himself. Any thoughts? Because I know there's an investigation. Do you think they'll get to the bottom of it?
I doubt. Well, I doubt we will ever know. I mean, if we do know, we will probably find out in 30 years when it turns out that whoever leaked the draft has tenure at some law school and nothing to lose, and they publish a best-selling book saying it was me.
Yeah.
But I doubt that. I doubt the investigation is going to come to anything. Maybe it was Alito, maybe it was Ginny Thomas, maybe it was any one of the law clerks. Maybe, and I find this theory is just as plausible as anything else, is that someone accidentally left a copy of the opinion in the bathroom, and then whoever used the bathroom next that found it and said, "Oh, what's this?" So, I don't know who. I can only speculate about who the leaker is.
I mean, but most certainly scary times. I mean, I'm concerned about where we're going. But lastly, this piece of legislation, do you think it goes anywhere, or is this just performative?
This new Manchin-Schumer agreement?
No, the Hank Johnson term limit bill.
Probably not, because since it's not spending legislation, it would need 60 votes in the Senate, and I don't see how you get 60 Republicans to or you'd have to get 10 Republicans. I don't see how you get 10 Republicans to vote for this. The term limit proposal typically calls for justice to serve 18 years. And that would mean Thomas goes away right away, replaced by Joe Biden. That would mean that John Roberts and Sam Alito would go away, I believe, by the end of Biden's term and would potentially be replaced by him. And, the Republican Party is just not going to vote for that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll see what this plays out, but not good things on the horizon as far as I can tell. But, Ian, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick.
Good stuff. Ian Millhiser, senior correspondent there at Vox, Vox.com, the website. Make sure you check that out. Going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. If you're just joining us or missed any of the program, make sure you grab the podcast wherever you get yours. You'll find ours. Back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1869. That was the day labor leader William Silvis died. Silvis was born in Armbaugh, Pennsylvania. He learned the trade of wagon making from his father, but soon he left home to take up an apprenticeship as an iron worker. He found work in Philadelphia. At the time, there was an increasing practice of iron molders to hire unskilled workers as helpers for the skilled craftsmen. This led to skilled workers seeing their wages cut. Silvis joined a strike against the wage erosion led by the Journeyman Stove and Hollowware Molders Union. Soon, he was elected secretary of the union. But Silvis understood that to truly have power, the iron molders would need to organize beyond Philadelphia. And so, in 1859, 12 molders from various unions met in Philadelphia to plan to join together. The Civil War put those plans on hold. During the war, as men went to fight, many workers saw their wages increase due to the labor shortage. But prices at the stores rose even more quickly, and it became harder and harder to make ends meet. Recognizing the need for labor to organize,
days, in 1863, Silvis helped found the Iron Molders International Union. He became the first president of the new union. 21 locals joined under the Iron Molders International Union, and it grew to include 8,000 workers. But Silvis had a bigger vision for the labor movement. He thought all skilled trades should band together to improve wages and working conditions. So in 1866, he founded the National Labor Union. The National Labor Union quickly grew to 30,000 workers. But Silvis died in 1869, cutting short his efforts to grow a national union. The union continued until 1873, when it dissolved.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So, in talking about just how far to the theocratic, insane side things have gotten, I look at the guy who's running for governor in Pennsylvania, this Doug Mastriano, and he's got a guy who's one of his supporters. I guess he's done some consulting work. This Andrew Torba, he's the CEO of Gab.com. Interesting email he put out recently. Now remember, he's the guy who said that they don't want Jews helping out unless you repent. You could come back and then we'll have you, but only when you repent, because we're not a Judeo-Christian nation. No, we're just a Christian nation, according to him. And he goes into saying, look, I don't apologize for anything I've said. I don't apologize for any of the work that I do because I've got Jesus. And look, he's completely unapologetic in anything he's going to do. And look, this is this movement of people who they believe that high above this is their moment. This is the moment, in his words, where we need Christian men who embrace their God-given masculine energy to conquer and lead. He says, currently we have weak and pathetic, emasculated Christian men like Mike Pence who embrace submissive, feminine energy. That ends now, he says. Stop and listen to what they're saying. He says, if we are going to build a Christian movement, it must be exclusively Christian, and we can't be afraid to say it out loud. This is where the Republican Party is going. No, Rick, no. The standard bearer in Pennsylvania, this is his guy. This is where we're heading. This belief that unless you're pure like us, none of those fake Christians either. We'll have none of them. We have seen the fruits, or lack thereof, of our nation being led by godless pagans, he writes. Non-believers, Jews, and fake Christians in name only. Now it's time for our nation, he says, to be led by wise Christian warriors who fear God, read their Bible, and will not bend at the knee to the wicked establishment class. Are you starting to get a picture of why I'm concerned about where the Republican Party has been going for a very long time? And I've been saying for years, and as Ian said a bit ago, the reality is you don't need a crystal ball. You don't need to be clairvoyant. You just need to pay attention to what these folks are telling you. You're never going to be pure enough in their world. Never. And eventually you're all in the Shark Tank. Eventually they're going to come for all of us. And this is the moment where we had better start uniting around the idea of, do we believe in our Constitution? Do we believe in freedom of religion or freedom from religion? And do we believe that religious tests are not something we should have for our elected leaders? If so, make sure you're registered to vote and make sure you vote. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you missed any of the program, download the podcast. Also email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for being here. See you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show.